Welcome everyone back to the arena. Today we've got a special guest with us, Chaz Donati. Did I get that right?
Yes, you
Ch-
did.
Chaz Donati. Chaz is a sales manager, mental health activist, advocate, and hybrid athlete, which I just confirmed, as well as, and he's a former, got through a former betting, gambling addiction.
Yeah,
And that's what we're going to focus on for the majority of our conversation today. First of all, Chaz, thank you for joining us today from
absolutely.
Scottsdale, Arizona. We're super happy to have you. Why don't we start with who is Chaz Donati? Donati?
Donati.
Who is
Um,
Chaz Donati?
yeah, I mean that's you can always ask somebody and they'll give you kind of a quick just summary of it all, but I got to be honest with you, I'm 34 years old and I still am figuring it out. I'm kind of starting over. And I'm sure we'll dive into that, with the sports gambling addiction, and kind of what I've gone through over the last few years or many years. But I think I really started to kind of figure out that question and figure out that answer during my recovery the last 4 years. I like to think of myself as an honorable person, honorable man. But with struggling with gambling addiction, a lot of lying and a lot of deceitfulness has been a big part of my life for the last 15 years, and that's kind of a hard concept to also grasp as well. So I think during my recovery, I found, my love for fitness and athletics and endurance type of style events too, even as I get older, past, maybe my peak hockey years in my 20s. Um, but, I'm still figuring that out. And I think that's a very respectable and honest answer. And a lot of people feel like they have to have it figured out, whether it is, the marriage and the kids and the college degree, which is all things that we should strive for. But when those don't happen, don't lose sight as to who you are, because you might change into a completely different person as you get into your 30s. And I'm kind of experiencing that now.
And so, I mean, take us kind of to the beginning of that journey as it relates to sports betting. Where did it start? How did you kind of start to lose maybe some control? When did you realize that you had a problem? Like, just take us through kind
Yeah.
of the journey, and we'll ask you some questions along the way.
Yeah. So, I do some speaking engagements locally at the state level with gambling conferences now. And I always start my story from the very beginning, and it's when I was 15 years old. You use the terminology, betting with friends, such as, I bet I can throw the baseball farther than you, or I bet I can run faster than you, right? We use the terminology that we don't really understand really what it's doing to us at that young age. And so for me in particular, I really started to notice, around 18, 19 years old is when I really started to notice a problem. And that's when I started looking up other means to gamble, finding different ways to get into the bookie world. And it kind of was just a roller coaster of a lifestyle for many, many years, into my 20s. And I, I, there were so many things that happened along the way where you feel like you have a grasp on this silent addiction, is what we call it. Um, but you don't, without getting the professional help that you truly need. Because in today's day and age, which we see it more than ever, the accessibility with technology is what is going to affect the younger generation and their education around risk and harm prevention with gambling. And that's something that we didn't have, growing up. As I'm realizing it as I get older, I'm continuing to learn more about the addiction and the tendencies within myself, but also others. And there's millions of people that are struggling, across the country in the United States, and millions, tens of millions around the world.
So you mentioned something in terms of like the 15 to 18-year-old that is using terminology or language. I bet
Hmm.
this, I bet that. And you said something along the lines of like they don't realize what that's doing. Can you elaborate a little bit more on like what you're insinuating or what you're implying in terms of like what is happening slowly
Yeah.
but surely?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is it starts to just elevate to a different level as we get older, right? And so, for example, we start with wagering friends because of friendly competition, right? We want to be the best. We want to beat our friends in everything that we do. But what that's doing is that's taking you to the next level, which is like poker nights with friends in high school, where all of a sudden now there's money and there's monetary value involved. Before, sometimes it's just bragging rights, but now it starts to lead into poker nights with friends or going to the casino with friends because we build this entertainment around um, gambling, and that's really what is starting to be seen at the younger age, the gamification of it, which will turn into harm later down the road. Um, it starts to release different dopamine levels at a very young age, and you get the feeling of winning something, which is normally a very good feeling. But then you start to experience the emotions of losing and you try to navigate what those emotions are. How do you come back from that? Normally, the recovery, or sorry, the one when you lose, you turn around and you're like, I want to win. I need a win. And so, if one of my buddies ran the 100-yard or the 40-yard dash faster than me, let's say, um, I would want to challenge him again. And those are sometimes the tendencies that we see with younger generation in gambling. They start to adopt this behavior of I have to get a win, I have to get a win, and if they continue to lose, and that's really what begins the addiction cycle. Um, at the end of the day, you'll never be to where you started. The only winners of gambling are ones that never start.
And so you had mentioned when we were talking about who is Chaz, he used to be a lot of lying, dishonesty,
Hmm.
deceitfulness. Can you just take us back to some of those moments, like a day in the life and what was going through, your mind, your mental headspace during those periods?
Yeah, so I think um, the hardest days were when I was with a significant other, and let's say it's Monday morning and we're looking to have a good start to the week. Well, normally Monday mornings were time to collect from the bookies. And so I would be scrambling to figure out ways to pay off my bookie without my significant other finding out. And so that's when the lying began as soon as I wake up on Monday mornings. And then it goes to, things that you want to do with your partner, vacations or dinners or events like Valentine's Day. Like you start to lie your way around a lot of those situations because you cannot afford to partake in those events. And so that's one of the biggest things that I started to realize is the effects that it had on other people versus just myself. So, like I mentioned, millions of people are affected with this addiction. However, multiply that by like four just for the one person that is addicted. And so I think that's one of the biggest things is there's a lot more people that are affected versus the current state of just the gambler.
And you talked about it being a silent addiction, but I mean, as somebody who has been in sports betting before, like I don't know
Yeah.
if I would say I ever had a problem with it, but I do know that it can be an around the clock thing, and that's something you're always thinking about, checking the scores, thinking about what games are coming up. Um, it's pretty loud in your head. And so I'm just
Hmm.
curious, what did you notice for yourself in terms of how much it pulled you away from the present moment of like maybe even just being at that dinner with your significant other or like just being in some of your life moments? Did you ever reflect on just how much it pulled you away?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that you truly reflect on during your recovery is how to rebuild relationships with maybe those you harmed. And you start to think of those moments when you're at dinner with friends and you run to the bathroom to check your phone on a score because you don't want people to know what you're doing, or if your significant other knows that you have a problem. You don't want them to know that you're on your phone. And so you start to notice the little things like constantly checking your phone, constantly checking lines. Because if there's not a game that's going your way, with the accessibility nowadays, you can immediately try to cover your losses with a random bet, like a quarter bet, or like the live action that is in play betting. And that's really when you start to see the action and the addiction tendencies are with live in game betting. There's a lot of people that can gamble responsibly. Like there is a big um, public spin on responsible gambling. However, what it doesn't do is really educate you on what happens when you don't even recognize the tendencies, right? And I think that's the biggest thing. Like with the differentiating factors with drugs and alcohol, a lot of them are physical. You can see the harm that it might be doing to one's body. With gambling, it's mental, it's processing. And so that's one of the things that you cannot do, is why we call it the silent addiction, because you can hide it so well. Physically, I could be in the best shape of my life. Physically, with people, they could see me smile. But we know as we continue on with this whole um, learning about mental health within people, a smile can be a very fake smile. And that's truly what gambling addiction can look like.
Another question I had on that, because you kind of
Yeah.
started to mention it. I'm noticing it being advertised on sports channels now,
Hmm.
legal means to gambling, FanDuel,
Yeah.
etc. What are your thoughts on, because it says, please gamble responsibly, or please drink
Yeah.
responsibly. It's just kind of this like disclaimer, but there's no like how to, and there's no, like you said,
Yeah.
there's no education around the tells of an addiction. So
No.
I just, what are some of your thoughts with that?
Well, as we start to see the styles of advertising that are leading it, a lot of people have related it to or compared it to the cigarettes of 1960s, right? When they were advertising to anybody of all age, realistically children. That's how it is today. ESPN has a betting app, right? ESPN's owned by Disney. Disney is a children's brand, right? Like Disney World and all this kind of stuff. They're able to capture their audience at a younger age now. And with the advertising, there's not a ton of laws that are put in place that prevent them from advertising to the masses that way. So it's scary. I mean, to be blatantly honest, it is very scary because children are on their phones, they're on video games, they're on television, they are everywhere now. And so you can't escape it. And that's where we need to truly set limitations. 18 is the legal gambling age, but kids are getting around it in schools because they're using parents' accounts. And so there's an accountability factor also on families to bring education around finances and accounting. I mean, we should be educating the high schoolers. I've gotten denied from high schools in the state of Arizona for doing gambling presentations because they participate in sweepstakes and raffle prizes at their schools. And technically, that would fall under the gambling umbrella of a type of gambling. But mine is specific to sports gambling, but they still don't want me to come and present negatively on the risk and the harm because they participate themselves in gambling type events. And so it's a hard uphill battle that I think a lot of people are going to fight, especially at the federal level. There's $0 that are contributed from our federal government towards gambling specific programs. There's $380 million federally given to drug programs. However, you know, it the drug addiction is only realistically 7 times, I believe, more or higher than gambling addiction, but yet they get 380 million times more revenue for sharing. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and that's something that we continue to lobby for and bring to awareness to people, is that we need more educational funding for the younger generation.
And I want to go back to your story a little bit. Like, when did you hit a rock bottom? And if so, like, what was that moment for you? Take us back to, that period of life, and how did you kind of pick yourself back up?
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of rock bottom moments throughout my 20s. I think waking up every single day, sweating, stressful, stressful about money, paying bills, getting food. I was always able to find a way out of it, and I was always able to cover my losses essentially. It hasn't come without destroying my credit score and having loans to pay, of course, right? My financial future is in jeopardy. Even as I sit here today at the age of 34, I will not be able to buy a home for many years, which I've accepted, and I'm totally okay with that because now I look at, my place of residency as, as long as I have comfy bed to sleep in, and a safe place to live, I don't need a big fancy house right now. And I don't need a lot of those things because I'm having to rebuild my financial future. So those are the rock bottom moments that you experience all the time. I'd say the main rock bottom one was when I was 30 and I was going to commit suicide. And because that is normally what happens during the silent addiction, suicide is the answer for a lot of gambling addicts. And since it became legalized, credit card debt has increased significantly. Suicide rates have increased significantly, especially among young men. And even though we can't specifically pinpoint gambling problem to that increased rate, it's easy to make um, stories and it's easy to read these articles and know that likely it was due to a gambling problem just because of how we see all the statistics continuing to rise and when legalization began.
What are some of the, I mean, those are some compelling facts there in terms of, I mean, a lot of what we are doing is in the spirit of mental health. And I always knew that gambling addiction is a problem that existed. I don't know if I ever thought through the correlations and like the gravity of it that to which it it can have like impact on the stats around suicide. And so I guess as serious of a topic as this is, what are some of the early tells? If you have friends that gamble, like myself, I gambled and I don't think there was ever a slippery slope there for me personally.
Yep.
But what are some of the early tells of maybe people in your social network that you should pay more attention to?
Yeah, I would say definitely changing their attitude and mood. Are they unable to go out to social settings due to cost? Uh, a big thing of social media is obviously FOMO, especially with our generation that grew up with it. We like to post, and we like to post all the positivity. We like to give people that FOMO and kind of brag on social media about what we're doing. And if you start to see friends kind of disappear from certain events, or they can't afford to go in certain places, that doesn't mean they have gambling addiction. However, if they make good money and they can't afford, the simple things of that life can bring, and you do know they gamble, that would be a good, thing to kind of look for. Mood swings are huge, especially with, within groups of friends. How angry are they about watching games is another one. Gambling goes back to, I have friends that still gamble on sports. Like I'm not going to, not be friends with them, right? But you do have to change sometimes your inner circle. There's a lot of people that I know who gamble a lot, and I can't be around that because it will trigger me. And so, there's things that you can look out for, like the patterns of how often they gamble. What are they gambling on? I have a friend that just does NFL season, and he bets like twice a weekend. He doesn't have a gambling problem. He may have a shopping problem though that I don't know about, where all his money goes. I don't know. But I think depression is big. Really worried about finances, borrowing money, taking money out from loan companies like payday loans. That's huge. Bankruptcy percentages. Bankruptcy is higher than ever, and a big part of that goes back to gambling as well. And so people are kind of at their ends meet with those kind of things. So you really have to, see if they can acknowledge that they have a problem, which is very difficult to do. I suggest that they seek help immediately because, if they have access to money, they're going to try to win back whatever they lost.
Yeah, and I want to go back. We kind of skipped by it, but you mentioned your rock bottom being you were ready to take your own life. I
Yeah.
mean, can you just walk through what's going through your head at that point in life, the rationale, and ultimately why you made, the courageous choice not to?
Yeah, it was July 2021. I had a visit, it's summertime in Arizona, so weather's great. We get visitors every now and then. And, I was just waking up for, 30 days straight of just not wanting to be around because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to beat this addiction. And keep in mind, like, even though that day that I was going to do it, that wasn't the last time that I bet. During my recovery, like, there's been multiple relapses and there's been multiple figuring it out because that's how aggressive this disease is. It's not just a typical addiction where people can't just, bet. It's not that easy. Accessibility is one of the biggest things. And so, to go back to that day, I finally decided I was just tired, just exhausted, mentally, physically exhausted. I wasn't motivated to do anything. I wasn't, doing any workouts. I was lazy. I was lazy in my relationships and my friendships. I just didn't want to be here anymore. And so, my dog actually ended up saving my life that day because he was sitting in front of the door thinking that we were just going to go on a walk. Like, he was so happy. And so you see the smile on like a dog's face, and you're like, they have no idea what's going on, but they do feel emotions. And all of a sudden, like, he was just so excited to just go on a walk on a beautiful day, sunny day in Arizona. And I think that changed my perspective. I had to start to follow a specific, you know, uh, phrase to live by, which I call find your more: motivation, opportunity, routine, and energy. I'm wearing sleeves right now, but I have it tattooed all over my arm, and different like kind of stories surrounding like the whole, I have a picture on my shoulder right here where I was going to do it because I want that daily reminder of the dark places I've been. Some people don't, and everybody's, kind of recovery looks different. I want that daily reminder because I know that this is something I'm going to deal with for the rest of my life because it's going to be around. And so I think from those experiences, I've been able to help, a lot of people that have come to me, friends of mine, even like close neighbors have reached out to me, and they're like, I have a problem and I didn't know what to do, but I know that you've gone through it because you've shared your story. And so when you hear stuff like that and you start to impact even a couple people can turn into a couple hundred can turn into a couple thousand. Being in front, oh, sorry, I was getting a call. I've been able to speak in front of, a ton of hundreds of people at these conferences, sharing my story and ideas for how to approach gambling addiction.
And what do you say, man? Dog saved your life. That hits, man. Because I got
Yeah,
a
the
dog of
picture
my
is right
own.
here. So it's like his paw on my shoulder, and I'm not done getting it done. I'm going to get some more stuff shaded, but it's his paw. And then inside the big part of the paw is the spot, like a picture of facing like where I was going to do it.
Wow.
I'm Matt. I'm giving you the first opportunity to respond to that because you have your dog, and so
Yeah, no, I mean, it's pretty like relatable, not in the sense of I've gotten to that place, but just in the sense of like I'm putting myself in that moment and thinking about my dog and just the uh
Man's best friend.
yeah, man, like how just like much obviously that must have touched you to then decide to make a different choice when you were obviously very set on taking your own life. So it's just a really powerful story. Sorry, MD, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't really go anywhere without him, to be
no.
honest.
Yeah, you sort of highlighted that acronym more, and now you're doing speaking work on related to the topic. I'm just curious how um, your perspective on not just why to continue living, but maybe more around like purpose and meaning and where you find fulfillment now. Like, how did that evolve for you to where it is today?
Yeah, I mean, I started to find personal challenges and achievements as part of my fulfillment during my recovery because it also helped occupy my mind. When I was doing all these day-to-day stuff just detrimental to my mental health, I signed up for an Ironman, which at the age of 30 is way past my what I thought was my prime for sports and activity. But I got to be honest, I'm probably in the best shape of my life at 34. I'm running in the Boston Marathon coming up in April. And, it's just all these other challenges have opened up opportunities for ultra racing and endurance racing where it forces me to get outside. So like ultra running and running these marathons, like these are outdoor activities, and being outdoors is something that's always been a passion of mine ever since I was a kid. And so to go back to feeling like a kid again has really helped with my recovery and kind of me rebuilding any sort of foundation to my life because you have to start somewhere, right? So I started doing what I am good at, which is I'm addicted to competition. And again, addicted mindset, addictive personality. But it's a healthy addiction. It causes me to eat healthier, be on a structured routine, calendar, something to look forward to as well. So those are kind of the things that I do now.
And in terms of the recovery journey, I assume it looks a little bit different than, an addiction to alcohol or drugs. I'm just wondering what that's looked like for you, and especially because of the accessibility piece. Like, you kind of need your phone, and obviously you can delete apps, but at the same time, it's that easy to just download them again. And so I'm just
Yeah.
curious what that looked like for you and continues to look like.
Yeah, and everybody's recovery looks different. There's really not a gambling addiction treatment center I can go to. There's mental health facilities I can go to, but I think there's more underlying issues that, you need to gambling specific treatment. So I did end up finding a gambling specific therapist, which was very helpful. GA meetings, I really wasn't for GA meetings, but I found a GA meeting that I am uh, happy to call like a good group. GA meetings are tough because there's so many of them, but like you have to find that good group of people that continue to go week in and week out to that specific meeting. Um, I've self-excluded myself on all the apps, which the self-exclusion is ban is only good for 5 years. Some are 10, but like most of them are only max of 5. So I know I'm going to get reached out to by these gambling companies in 5 years. So where am I in 5 years with my life? Um, I may not be married and I may not have kids. Maybe that's not for me, right? And I have to financially, prepare myself to have a family because of my addiction with money and gambling. That's something that you have to consider when having a family is, do you want to risk putting them in danger of losing a house? Passing your finances over to your significant other is a main topic that I hear in GA meetings. And so my recovery now is trying to find that community and that support system within GA and other people who are experiencing it. But as it becomes more mainstream, you start to see more people on Reddit communities coming out and talking about their addiction. A lot of people don't know where to turn for help. And the biggest thing is because they need to not have control of their finances. That's truly like we have compulsive and impulsive behavior. So we are known as compulsive gamblers.
And then, oh, sorry, go ahead, Andy. No,
Yeah,
no.
so I guess, um, like you said, it's not something you would think is like as physiological, as maybe alcohol, where there's withdrawal symptoms, and then for recovery, I know there's a lot of people who are like, I can't have another sip of alcohol. I'll never have a sip of alcohol again, or I'll never touch that drug again. But to your point, like gambling is such a broad topic, and it's linked to that dopamine receptor, and so like I guess a personal question for you is like, where are you at with that slope? Like, are you able to partake in, let's say in the future, if you have a kid, or like, let's say you had a kid today, like, could you partake in a raffle, or like, how sensitive is this? You kind of see what I'm getting at with the question. It's
Yeah,
like, how
100%.
sensitive is this for you? Like, how much do you have to avoid it? How cognizant do you have to be of it?
Yeah. So I think for anybody who experiences the gambling addiction, they need to not do anything. And that is casinos, that is raffles, that is sweepstakes, that is lottery tickets, that is scratchers, that's sports, that's everything that would be under the umbrella of gambling. But as we alluded to earlier, it's very difficult because it's everywhere. It's with everything that we do. I play a lot of golf. And so, within golf, a lot of my friends, they want to play golf games. And, gambling is huge on the golf course. It's how you make it more exciting, especially for people with different levels of handicaps. Um, so it's just about being open and honest to people that I am with. I did partake in fantasy football this last year. I actually got second place in my league and I accepted a payout. And I think the biggest thing for me is it wasn't good for me. It caused a lot of triggers throughout the year. And this is going to be the first year in 12, 13, 15 years, maybe something like that, where I probably won't play fantasy football. And that's unfortunate because I use fantasy football as a way to keep in touch with my closest friends from high school. ask them how their kids are, how their family is. It's like, he wants to talk about a trade, but we get to talk for an extra 30 minutes on just life and catching up. And so it's a hard teeter totter that I'm going back and forth with on, if it is just $100, is that considered a relapse? It is. And that would be starting over from day zero. But that's where, if it's such a hard question. If you are addicted to gambling, the correct answer is no. I have a friend who is a recovering alcoholic and he drinks non-alcoholic beer. Are you going to tell him that that's a relapse? Well, no, not if it's non-alcoholic, but you can make a case as to, because of the taste, it could trigger him, right? So it does depend on the person. And I think that's where we really have to, it's very important that if you work with somebody in a professional field, you have to be open and honest with them, because everybody is different. Every recovery looks different. I think if I can somehow get to a point where I can participate in fantasy football for $100 every single year, and that's the only thing that I do, I would be okay with that, because of what fantasy football brings to my life and my social life with my friends, since they all live out of state and I'm the only one that doesn't live in California anymore. So there is a big social aspect there, but if it triggers you, you can't do it. And this year it did trigger me. So do I take a year off and then come back in 2026 or 2027? Maybe that's an option that you have to do. But if you don't take that seriously and you don't consider the alternatives, you'll never beat the addiction.
What do you say to people that will say, well, Chaz, sports betting, it just makes the game more entertaining. It's no big deal. I hear that a lot. And I think that was the case for me for a little while. And I don't, and now I don't bet predominantly because I started my own business a year ago. And ever since then, I'm like, dude, I don't have money to lose. I care more about, supporting my business and growing my voice than I do about a little bit of extra entertainment on a game. And so that was, It was pretty easy for me to move away from it. But I do hear a lot of people, friends included, that, well, dude, it just makes the game more entertaining. No big deal. What would you say to that?
I'd say that's a problem with the organization for having a bad product on the field. If you're having to bet on them for entertainment, then the product on the court or the field or the ice ain't good. And, but
well, we are Chicago sports fans, so that does, that does check out.
Yeah, it does. And I think that's why a lot of the organizations accepted gambling, because they realized they were losing a lot of revenue on probably TV deals and other places where the teams are not good. And you're losing tickets, you're losing merchandise, you're losing a whole business model that is built around these teams and these players. And so when you don't have that, how do you make up for lost income? You bring in gambling and you take a piece of it. So I think that's a big contributing factor as to why it was legalized. Roger Goodell said, I think more than 5 years ago now, but he said, we will never partner with a sports gambling operation or a company. 2 years later, he partners with FanDuel and DraftKings. Right. But he realized how many extra millions, hundreds of millions of dollars he will make and profit off of it. And so, I think, again, it's the Wild West right now. So there's a lot of companies that are involved. There's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of money being thrown around, kind of similar to when crypto was, crypto is now the crypto arena in LA, right? Who knows if that sponsorship was worth it? Maybe that's why they're striking while the pan is hot with these gambling companies. Because they're charging so much for these partnerships and they're getting revenue from them. I don't think it's a sustainable business model, because as you start to lose and people become addicted, they're not relying on the small individuals like Mike. I don't know how much you bet, right? But maybe let's just say you bet $10 a game on the Bears. They're not worried about you, right? 90% of gambling revenue comes from 5% of players. Think about that. That is, they attack the gambling addiction because that's their only sustainable business revenue that they know they can get, where they take everything for what that 5% is worth. And then what do? Once that 5% goes away, they're building the addiction at a younger generation. And so here you go. Here comes the cycle, right? Another 5% will be addicted. But they're not worried about the people who are just doing it for entertainment. And I think that's why it's not being heavily, it's talked about, but I don't think it's being heavily regulated. And I think banks need to get involved. I think they need to do a better job vetting people as to how much money they make, submit W-2s, taxes, paychecks. Um, I don't know how I was able to fly under the radar, because there were times where I would bet 25 cents because I needed action. And then there was times where I had, $100,000 on a game.
Dang, 100K in a game.
I lost more in a day. I lost 319 on one game.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
No wonder you were waking up with back pain and neck pain.
And there was no vetting from the company. They didn't know I didn't have that to lose, by the way. Like, that's everything I owned. And, but, a specific sports betting company, which I won't name, they didn't care if they took that from me.
Yeah, that's
They'll
another
limit
just.
they'll limit the amount that you win, but they'll never limit the amount you lose.
I mean, from a moral perspective, like the enabling and then allowing somebody to fundamentally do it irresponsibly,
Yeah,
is wild to me.
how did my account not get flagged? I
Yeah.
was doing I placed over 100,000 wagers in less than a year, 5.5 million in wager bets, and still my account was never flagged for a gambling problem.
That's an indictment on, like you said, the deregulated state of
In the
the
UK,
industry.
the UK does not partake in VIP customers anymore because of that exact reason. They are enablers to keep those that are addicted on sites. I was getting courtside seats to the Suns. I was getting concert tickets. I got over
Really?
$75,000 in free bets from a company because I bet so much.
They gave you courtside seats to a Suns game for being a That is like so wrong. I mean, I even the idea of like a VIP. I actually it reminds me. I
I
totally
sat
forgot about that.
I sat courtside any game I wanted. Put it that way.
That is
The
crazy,
least
man.
they could do for you. I
Well,
guess
there you go.
because you went through some therapeutic modalities, was there anything? Did you ever unlock or discover anything deeper than like maybe the gambling addiction was feeding something or serving something, a void, if you will, that was deeper rooted in your life that maybe we can end on and talk about just to what extent there was something
Yeah,
else in your life, bigger picture.
yeah. I think I was so involved with sports, and I was a captain for a lot of my hockey teams. I had a great group of friends. I wouldn't say I was like the popular kid in school, but I definitely had a good group where people knew who I was. But it wasn't until recently where I realized just how lonely I also am at the same time. Um, I'm not good at relationships. Um, I, and a lot of that goes back to my gambling addiction. Yeah, like I was lying in my relationships. Um, but I think there's a sense of I've always also wanted to fit in, even though maybe I already did. And I think that was, gambling was my escape for a lot of my personal loneliness issues. Um, and I don't think it has anything to do with something that happened to me as a kid. I think maybe, you know, social media has a big play with that. I've lived out of state, away from my family and friends for 15 years. I've been in Arizona since 2012, so 12 years now, and I think that has a big contributing factor. Um, it's lonely not being near your closest friends. Yeah, you can always make friends. We have a lot of different groups of friends, right? But like, there's only a handful that I can count on one hand that truly know who I am. And I think that goes back to just this whole social media, keeping up with the Joneses, like trying to be popular at an older age, and it has nothing to do with that. Like, I've just seen such a different part of life now that I want, and it's core memories. I really enjoy watching movies again, like just really enjoying the peace and quiet of having a roof over my head. And I have to build a different relationship with money because of my addiction, but I truly believe, you know, that money will never buy me happiness. And I think the happiness I need to find is just things that I miss doing, being outdoors, being around a good group of people, So I think that's kind of fed the addiction for as long as it did. And that's what I've realized as I continue this recovery journey, right? Like I knew nothing. I, I, I felt like I was nothing without sports. And then sports also almost took my life. And so it's a hard relationship uh, to grasp and to understand is the one thing that gave me everything from when I was a kid. Um, I'm one of those weird people that loves listening to baseball games on the radio. Like, you know what I mean? Like, my love for sports runs deep, but sports are also my kryptonite. And as we know, Superman can't go near kryptonite. And so it's like it's a hard battle. And that's when I started to kind of realize that I was also just very alone. So needing to find other hobbies and find other interests in life. And so when I tell people don't ever stop trying to find a new hobby, don't ever stop trying to find new interest. I'm getting into art now. I'm, writing music, even though I'm never going to sing, but like I'm just trying to write and do different things that I never normally would do because my time was always occupied with sports gambling.
To wrap up, Chaz, what are you most proud of in life?
Um, that's hard. Um, I think one of the biggest things is because I asked my dad this question recently, and unfortunately, we're about to lose my father to cancer here in the next few weeks. And I asked him
Yeah,
this
man, I'm sorry.
question, and you know, he said that he was proud of me for admitting my wrongs and working to fix them, because a lot of people will just never try. And we try to do a lot of things in life, right? But it's so hard to really try to fix some of your biggest issues. And it won't ever be fixed unless you try your absolute hardest and give it a full effort. And I think that's what I'm most proud of right now is I'm trying every day to fight this disease that is never going to go anywhere. And how do I change my life and my lifestyle to adapt to that disease? Because I don't take medication, I don't take anything. I'm doing it the natural way, and that's a challenge that I'm gonna be proud of when I can get a full 1 year under my belt. It takes that long. I have not had a full 1 year because I've had multiple relapses, right? And even though I know the emotions and I know the experience within each relapse, once I get to a full year, um, I think that'll be the proudest moment of my life.
Chaz Donati, everybody. Chaz, thank you, man.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to.